Hello, and welcome to the EcoSend podcast, a weekly podcast on becoming a climate conscious business. Every week, we'll be interviewing founders, marketers, and leaders who are championing the climate. The podcast is hosted by myself, James Gill, co-founder and CEO of Go Squared, and the makers of EcoSend. If you run a business or are responsible for growing one, and you want to have a positive impact on the environment, then listen on. Every episode, our goal is for you to learn something and be inspired to take some action. Every single one of us making small changes and some large changes will add up. We're all in this together. So let's get on with the show. Thanks so much for listening. Now let's meet today's guest. Hi there, welcome to another episode of the EcoSend podcast. I'm your host, James, and I'm thrilled to be giving you another show all about the climate and how that intersects with what we're doing in the digital and tech world. And this week, we are talking about AI. And if you've been at all close to the internet, as most of us are, you'll probably struggle to go even an hour without hearing something about AI, machine learning, ChatGPT these days. AI and all of the surrounding technologies there supposedly have the power to change our lives enormously or end all civilization. And so we will have to find out how that plays out. But it's a topic we care about very deeply here at EcoSend because we are all about trying to build the best email marketing software on the planet. And we also care deeply about the climate and sustainability. And AI plays a huge part in both of those sides for positives and negatives. And so there's a lot of questions and perhaps not enough conversation going on right now about the climate cost of AI and these systems. So I am very excited to be speaking with someone who knows a bit about this subject, and that is Kasper, who joins me today. Kasper is a data scientist at the Danish National Police, with several years of experience in consulting in the financial sector. Kasper is also co-founder and board member at the Danish Data Science Community, the DDSC. Kasper cares about reducing the environmental impact of software in general and data science in particular, so makes a great candidate to talk to about this, and especially things like reducing the carbon footprint of training and serving machine learning models. So I think you could be the most perfect person to be speaking to about this topic, Kasper. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, James. I'm well, and I'm very happy to be on the show because this is a topic that is very dear to me.
Absolutely. I am very keen to unpack a lot of things here. I think many of us are struggling to even keep up with whatever today's news is, or even last week's news is about AI and whatever new thing has come out. And by the time this show airs, which usually is only a few days to a week after we record it, there'll probably be something new come along. But I am very keen to talk about yourself first and how you got into the world of both AI, machine learning, probably the hottest thing going right now, but also why you care about sustainability and the climate too. I'm keen to hear everything about your story.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. How I got into AI all started, I think it was back in 2015 when I read a blog post from a blog called Wait But Why, which detailed how AI would revolutionize basically everything, all aspects of society. And it also referenced how some scientists speculated that in the relatively near future, we would have AI that would be as intelligent as humans. And I thought that is very exciting, and it sounds like something that I want to be a part of. And so that's how I began my journey into machine learning, because that's what I think of when I think of AI.
Yeah.
And at some point, um, my interest in machine learning or AI, let's call it AI for now. I guess that's a term that has a bit of a broader appeal.
Sure.
So my interest in AI intersected with my interest in sustainability when I realized at some point that it like making or developing AI models requires a lot of energy, and given that not all our energy is from renewable sources, uh, this training these models or developing these AI models has a carbon footprint that is
Yeah.
sometimes noticeable. If I were to use a rather neutral term,
Yes.
um, yeah, I tend to, or I try to not to offer too many value judgments when I speak about
Mhm.
this topic, because I'd rather focus on the numbers,
Yeah.
and maybe let other people make their own decisions about what they believe is right or wrong in this debate. But but
Yeah.
um but yeah, so and this like my realization of the unforeseen environmental impacts of AI um, started to, this realization came to be when I read a few research papers. One of them was by Emma Struble. She's an American researcher. She wrote a paper that's titled something along the lines of policy considerations for large-scale natural language processing, or something along those lines. And another paper simply called Green AI, which were, at least to my knowledge, some of the first academic papers that addressed the environmental impacts of AI,
Mm.
specifically the carbon footprint of large language models.
Really?
And
Okay.
yeah, and
When were those written out of interest?
I think the MS Drupal one was in 2019, but I
Oh,
didn't
really?
come across
Okay.
it. I think I came across it in 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I also simultaneously, like as I started to think about these issues, I also it also became apparent that not a lot of people talked about it. At least not, just a few years ago, not very many people talked about these issues, and I thought it would be meaningful for me to partake in this journey towards broader awareness of the environmental impacts of
Yeah.
AI, and that's also when I started to write about these things and talk to people like you and give
Mm.
presentations and yeah and these types of activities. Yeah, so and I
Yeah.
generally I think that climate change is one of the most meaningful problems to address for me personally.
Sure.
And given that I don't address this problem directly in my day-to-day work,
Yeah.
I found it a very meaningful spare time activity
Mm.
to
Yeah.
talk about these things. Yeah.
By day thinking about machine learning, by night saving the world. Yeah.
Catching crooks with code, as I sometimes say, at day, and then yeah, writing blog posts at night.
Yeah. Now I know you have written extensively on the topic, Casper. I'm sure we'll link in the show notes of the episode to some of your articles on the topic of ChatGPT, of AI,
Yeah,
and the carbon footprint there. Maybe listeners who are following along, myself included here, sometimes there is a lot to understand with what we're even talking about when we talk about AI
yeah.
and especially with ChatGPT, talked about large language models there. Is there a real beginner's intro to what we're actually talking about here and why this uses energy more so than say a standard sort of, I don't know, web page loading on the internet? It would be really interesting to hear your take. And I would also,
Yeah,
I know we have, we try to keep these shows to half an hour. I'm sure you could talk all day about this, Casper. But
probably,
if you
yeah.
can do the magic and condense it down into a few minutes, that would be amazing.
Yeah, sure, sure. Okay.
That's a tough ask,
Yeah,
I know.
so it's my impression that there's no universal definition of what AI is, as
Mm,
opposed to machine learning and deep learning and large language
mm,
models and so on. But the way I like to think about it is that AI is a sort of umbrella term.
yeah,
Uh, so that's AI is more or less making computers behave intelligently. And for now, let's just ignore what it means to behave intelligently. But then you
yeah.
have different methods for achieving intelligent behavior by computers. And one of these, in my opinion, one of these, again, umbrella terms that's below AI, that's machine learning. And then you have different types of machine learning, one of them being deep learning. And then the way you do deep learning is you build very deep neural network architectures. And deep in this context means that these neural network architectures have several layers where each layer performs some sort of computation.
Mm,
And then once you finish training, you know, yeah, once you finish a training procedure, you end up with a deep learning model that could
hmm.
be a large language model. And large language models is basically a type of deep learning or machine learning model that, to put it very simply, can do things with text data.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah. Some say that ChatGPT is basically just predicting the most likely next word
Sure. Like
in
predictive
a
text on your phone. Yeah.
yeah. So when you ask ChatGPT to uh, when you ask it a question, put very simply again, what it does is it generates a word and then it predicts the most likely next word in its response and so on. And that's probably too simplistic, but that's how some people conceptualize what it is that ChatGPT
Sure.
is doing. And now to the question, why do these things have a carbon footprint, or why do these things have an environmental impact?
Mm,
Um, that is because they are a type of digital service, and all digital services, they need to run on some computer hardware,
hmm.
uh, and all computer hardware requires electricity to run.
Yeah.
And all electricity, or well, yeah, this is something that is maybe out of scope for this episode, but some people would probably say that all electricity has a carbon footprint, even the
Right.
electricity from renewable sources, because you could, in theory, divide or like distribute the initial carbon footprint of making a EV, or sorry, a solar panel park. You could distribute those environmental costs across all the electricity units generated by that solar panel park.
Hmm.
So that's why some people say that even renewable energy has a carbon footprint. But anyway, now I'm probably going into
Yeah.
too much
No, that
detail.
is no,
But
no. This is
that is
very, very interesting. No,
so that
no.
is why these models can have a carbon footprint to begin with. And the reason that the carbon footprint is sometimes noticeable is that especially large language models, like the ones that power services like ChatGPT, they require huge amounts of data to
Mm,
achieve their abilities. And every time they look at a piece of data during their training process or during the inference process, that data has to pass through some very complex computations, or at least some very energy intensive computations.
sure.
So these large models, they're just much more energy intensive than the very simple models that you may use to predict the price of a home or
Got
some
it.
other like
Got it.
relatively simple machine
Hmm.
learning use case. Yeah, and so
Super
when
interesting.
you think about the environmental impact of these models, there's it makes sense sometimes to think about different stages of an AI system's life cycle. And one way to conceptualize the stages of an AI system's life cycle is to say that first you have some materials extraction, and then you have
Mm,
some materials manufacturing, and
got
then you
it.
have hardware manufacturing, and then you have model training, which is where you train the model to learn to do a specific task. And this process, if you were to make an analogy to web development, this process would be similar to the process you go through to code the website.
Got it.
Then
Yeah.
the next stage in the life cycle would be the so-called deployment stage, which is where
Mhm.
the trained AI model is made available for its users. And this is the
Okay.
stage that ChatGPT is currently in. And
Yeah.
again, going back to the website analogy, that would be when you are done coding your website and now it's live for people
You
to
put it
see.
online. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the final stage is then the end of life where you dispose of, for instance, the hardware on which
Mm,
your AI system has been running. Um,
got
and
it.
yeah, and then obviously the carbon footprint or the environmental impact differs between these different stages.
Sure. That's actually fascinating because I guess we talk a lot about the energy usage of, say, the servers running. Like you imagine that server, that computer in a in a dark data center somewhere with a
Yeah,
fan spinning away, but like you're
yeah,
considering also the all of the supply chain, I guess, of like putting that server in that data center, and
yeah,
then what happens with that after it's done, after a grueling life processing all
yeah,
these calculations
yeah.
for
Yeah,
for
exactly.
us
And so
humans.
when you use ChatGPT, obviously the device that you are using to access ChatGPT, that device also has
Yeah,
sort of a carbon footprint or an environmental impact. There's some
yeah,
electricity consumption associated with, powering your computer, but that's completely different from what I'm normally talking about when I talk about uh, the the environmental impact of an AI system. When I
mm,
talk about that, I'm only referring to the um, the actual environmental costs associated with um, developing and making this type of service available.
sure, sure. Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess the computer I'm using to access that ChatGPT has like a whole different set of conditions, and I might be using that for all sorts of different things. So yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And
Mm.
if you're a company and you want to you know uh, compute your total carbon footprint, those two are two very different things.
Mm, absolutely. Okay, so this makes a I mean this is making a lot of I think it's making a lot of sense, Casper. You're doing a very good job of explaining an incredibly complex topic here. So
Thank you.
ChatGPT is an example of one of these large language models.
Yeah.
And it's clearly exploded in popularity since its
Mhm.
release to the into the wild, like
Yeah.
almost like the dinosaurs at Jurassic Park running
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
What what has that meant for sort of the energy consumption? Has that led to, I assume, does that mean there's a lot more servers that have been needed and a lot more energy that's been needed to power those servers? And how does one even go about establishing how much energy that might be, let alone the carbon footprint of that?
Yeah. Well, that's not at all an easy task. And
Yes.
the main reason that it's a very difficult undertaking is that OpenAI and other providers of these types of services, for that matter, they they don't publish the data that we need to make these sort of assessments.
Right.
In in the ideal world, these like OpenAI, they would themselves publish, for instance, the energy consumption associated with asking ChatGPT one question.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but even if they did so, there would be some that that number would depend on some assumptions, such
Mm.
as, for instance, the average length of the question that you ask and
Yeah.
the average length of the response that you get.
Sure.
So even if OpenAI gave us these numbers, they would have to um, rely on some assumptions. Obviously, they could perhaps just measure the total energy consumption from running the service that hosts
Hmm.
ChatGPT, um, and then divide that total energy consumption by the total number of queries.
Yeah.
That would give you an indication of the average energy consumption per query. But if you're, let's say you're a business and you want to know how many or how big a carbon footprint does our use of ChatGPT have, then you would be relying on, an average provided by OpenAI and not the actual energy consumption associated with the questions that you ask.
Hmm.
So it's a very complex topic, but uh, I've written a few blog posts where uh, I provide some guesstimates. That's
Yeah.
how I like to refer to them.
Yeah.
Where I try to arrive at an estimate of what could the carbon footprint and electricity consumption of ChatGPT be. And one way that I initially went about it was I looked into the research literature and I found a paper by a researcher from Hugging Face called Sasha Lucioni, and she has some co-authors of this paper where they estimate the life cycle carbon footprint of the language model that is called Bloom. And this language model is interesting in in estimating the carbon footprint of ChatGPT because
Mm.
Bloom and ChatGPT's underlying models are very similar in their size. And so this paper by Lucioni and others, they found that the average energy consumption or electricity consumption per query to Bloom was 0.0039 kilowatt hours. And
Hmm.
so I used that as a starting point,
I
and
see. Yeah.
then I made some estimates, or I made some assumption of about how many users do we think that ChatGPT may
Mm.
have, and then simply by multiplying the energy consumption per query by the total number of queries that we think ChatGPT receives allows us to arrive at a guesstimate.
I
Um,
see.
but the issue with this approach is that even though Bloom and ChatGPT's underlying model are similar in size, uh, it's fair to assume that OpenAI has probably put an effort into optimizing ChatGPT's
Mm.
underlying model because the more efficient it is at processing your questions, the better the user experience because the less you have to wait for a
Yeah.
response, but also the fewer costs they accrue from hosting the service,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
also coincidentally, I don't think maybe I'm maybe I should give them the benefit of
Mm.
doubt, but I don't think that that their motivation for this is to reduce their energy consumption, but coincidentally, this would
Mm.
probably also reduce their energy consumption. And
Right.
so,
Yeah. So the aligned interests there of reduced
yeah, yeah,
costs. Yeah.
yeah. So that's one positive aspect of
Mm.
this. That usually, mm, everything else held equal, if your model is more efficient, like if it can process requests quicker, it also uses less energy.
Got
Um,
it. Yeah.
yeah, well, simply put, I'm sure there can be edge cases where this is not true, but
Sure.
well, anyway, then to arrive at a different or to use a different method for estimating the carbon footprint and electricity consumption of ChatGPT, I I used some other people's estimate of how many GPUs are needed to run the ChatGPT service. So
Mm,
this is an article by some guys whose last names are Patel and Ahmed, if I remember
okay.
correctly. Yeah,
Okay.
for everything I say, I can provide a reference
We will, yeah, we'll
if need
definitely get a
be.
link.
But
Yeah.
they wrote a really nice article where they uh, that their purpose was not to estimate the environmental cost, but the monetary cost of running the ChatGPT service. So they estimated how many
Right.
GPUs you need to serve
I
ChatGPT
see.
to the number of users that we think ChatGPT has. Um,
Yeah.
and they estimated that you need roughly 29,000 GPUs. And for those who are not familiar with the hardware component GPU, it's
Mm,
basically a uh, it's now when data centers use it to run AI models, it's a piece of hardware that's optimized for running AI models, and it's
mm,
more efficient usually and quicker than other types of computer processors.
yeah.
But yes, it's 29,000 of these. That's a huge amount. Just
That is
like
a lot of GPUs.
yeah, when you buy, a consumer laptop that you can use for gaming, it has one GPU, and that GPU is very, very weak compared to
Mm,
the data center GPUs. So imagine that you need 29,000 laptop GPUs, but
mm.
you need them to be like 10 times or like thousands of times more powerful than your laptop GPU. Anyway, so it's
Yeah.
just a huge amount of GPUs. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I said, okay, these guys say they seem quite knowledgeable about hardware. I think their estimate is about right. So if we think ChatGPT requires 29,000 GPUs, we can actually um, compute the total energy consumption from these GPUs if we make an assumption about how much electricity these GPUs use as a ratio of their maximum electricity use. Because
Got
you
it.
can
Yeah.
actually on the internet, NVIDIA, the
Yeah.
manufacturer of these GPUs, they actually do provide information about what's the maximum power draw of these
Right.
GPUs. So
Yeah. Yeah.
if I remember correctly, the maximum power draw of one GPU is zero point 0.4 kilowatts. That means
Mm,
if this GPU runs for 1 hour, it will have consumed zero point 0.4 kilowatt hours of electricity. And
yeah.
then you need to make an assumption of is it running at full power all the time, or
Mm,
is it
mm.
running at maybe 75% or 50%? So let's say it's running at
Mm.
50% of maximum power draw. Then you have in 1 hour, this one GPU will have consumed zero point 0.2 kilowatt hours,
Mm.
which means that you have to multiply zero point 0.2 kilowatt hours by 29,000. Then you
Yeah.
arrive at the hourly energy consumption from all these GPUs,
Got it.
which you can then multiply by 365 to arrive at the annual electricity consumption
Yeah.
from these GPUs. But yeah, um,
That makes a
yeah,
lot. No. It's fascinating hearing the. I am being crude by saying back of envelope maths, but
yeah. I
I
mean,
think
it
it's
is.
amazing what you can find from, well, especially from an organization called OpenAI. They're not being exactly very open about
Yeah,
some
yeah,
key info
yeah,
here, I guess.
yeah.
I
And one.
know. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go
Yeah, yeah.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay,
No,
okay. If I can
go
just
ahead,
make one
please.
point.
Yeah, yeah.
So everything I just said assumes that ChatGPT is running on the language model called GPT 3.5.
Right. Yeah.
because I did these estimates a few
Yeah.
months back. But now
Yeah.
OpenAI has released an even bigger, or reportedly an even bigger model called
Mm.
GPT-4, and it's rumored to have 1 trillion parameters, which is parameters. The number of parameters is just a way to just to talk about the size of the model. And GPT-3 had 175 billion. So
Mm.
uh, GPT-4 is what, a bit more than 5 times larger than its
Wow.
predecessor. So I think it's safe to assume that ChatGPT now has a bigger energy consumption per query than it used to have, if we
Yeah.
think that ChatGPT is now running on GPT-4. Yeah.
Wow.
And then, so that was the electricity consumption. If I can just briefly touch upon the carbon footprint,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother ball game. That's really, really difficult because now ChatGPT is so widely used that it's very safe to say that it's running in multiple data
Mm.
centers across the world.
Sure.
And it and for and each geographical region around the world has their own carbon footprint per electricity unit that you consume.
Yeah.
And this is because some countries, they depend a lot on coal, and some have a lot of renewable energy. So, yeah, as everyone is probably aware, some countries have rather clean energy, and some have energy that's less clean.
Yeah.
And so, if you wanted to compute the total carbon footprint of ChatGPT, you would need to know specifically what data centers the model is running in, and how many queries each data center handles. And then
Mhm.
you could probably find data about the average carbon intensity of electricity of that specific region. But
Yeah.
this is something like those two first things I mentioned, we don't have, there's no way we can know this.
Sure.
So it's not feasible really to make any, uh, I don't know, guesses about the carbon footprint. But what you can do is, if you're a business and you would like to know your own carbon footprint from using ChatGPT, for instance, as part of your email marketing
Yeah. Yeah.
automation efforts, then you could use any of my estimates of the energy consumption per query, and then
Yeah.
you have to track how many queries do you send to ChatGPT, and
Yeah.
then you would have to make an assumption about what data center you think handles your
Mm.
requests. So you guys, you're based in the UK, so
Hmm.
that's probably a data center in Ireland.
Hmm.
And so you could use the average carbon intensity of electricity produced in Ireland to arrive at your total carbon footprint from using ChatGPT.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is possible, at the granular level to arrive at estimates of the carbon footprint that are
Yeah.
somehow reasonable or sensible. But on the larger scale,
Mm.
yeah, you would have to probably just use the global carbon intensity of energy if you wanted to, try and compute the total carbon footprint of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Because there's no way you can know all the details you need to know in order to make a granular estimate.
Absolutely.
Um,
I guess
yeah,
for many people in especially in a software background, it's
yeah,
one of those things that everyone's so used to having very precise calculations and measurement for things. And then when it comes to this, you're dealing with so many variables, and it's impossible to get to the absolute perfectly measured
yeah,
result, isn't it? It's
yeah.
yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah. I know we're almost at time, but I know that one of the things you did also mention was we talk a lot on this subject of measurement. We talk a lot about carbon footprint. But I know you were also saying that there's other aspects around water usage and air
Yeah.
pollution and even soil pollution as well. Like,
Yeah, soil
um,
contamination. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Briefly, if you can, Casper, what's the impact of those? Because those are, beyond any of the stuff we've even just talked about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'm not the only one who failed to give attention to these other environmental impacts,
Mm,
because I've struggled to find data or information that I can work with to estimate those other impacts,
mm,
except for the water consumption or the water footprint. Because
right.
recently there was a scientific paper that even made it to mainstream media, which
Mm,
estimated the water footprint of some AI or one AI model. I can't remember which one, but and as a on a side note, they said that ChatGPT probably consumes a half a liter of water per 20 to 50 queries. Uh,
wow.
so
Wow.
let's say that it's 50 queries takes half a liter, then it's 10 milliliters per or yeah per query. Um, but that doesn't sound like a lot. But if you have billions of
Ah,
queries even each day, then the water consumption will become noticeable. I recently did again some what did you call it? Back of the envelope maths.
yeah.
I like that expression. It was just a brief LinkedIn post because I felt this was something that required more attention. So I wrote a brief LinkedIn post about this topic, and through my back of the envelope maths, I estimated that ChatGPT may have consumed 250 million liters of water in April 2023.
Wow.
And
Wow.
then some people say you mean reused, because they assume that ChatGPT is being cooled down by, I don't know, wastewater or something. But no, that's not the case. It's actually water, clean water that could have been drunk, that is being used for cooling the data centers that host ChatGPT. Um,
Wow.
and then some people say, okay, well, this water, it evaporates, so it's not really a problem because it just stays within Earth's atmosphere. And I guess that's true. I'm not a physicist, but let's just say that's true. But that's not the problem. The problem is that you're actually using water in regions that can be affected by drought. So in this
Mm.
research paper, the authors showed a map of the US which highlighted areas that are affected by drought at some interval. And they said that in these areas that are affected by drought, you have thousands of data centers. So,
Wow.
in regions that don't have enough water, you do have data centers that consume potentially millions of liters of water. Um, and I think
Wow.
that's another very important environmental impact of
Absolutely.
AI and of our digital world in general, that we need to yeah,
Yeah.
give more attention to.
That
Yeah,
is absolutely fascinating because very few people, you rarely, comparatively to people talking about carbon footprint and carbon offsetting, like the
yeah,
water side and how that relates to digital services is like barely being spoken about. And I think there's
yeah,
something so tangible about saying this stuff that I'm drinking all day
yeah,
is being used up by the same things I'm writing on my computer. It's
yeah.
that is incredibly eye-opening. Casper, would love to talk to you for another. I would love to talk to you for the rest of the day, but I am afraid we must wrap our an absolutely fascinating treasure trove of an episode. So I want to make sure anyone listening can hear more, get in touch, learn more from your words of wisdom, and hear more of your back of envelope calculations, which I am certainly going to be looking for. So I believe people can find you on LinkedIn and on Medium, where you've been writing some phenomenal work. So we'll link both of those in the show notes.
Yeah, sounds good. And just wanted to let people know that you can feel free to connect, even if LinkedIn says I prefer to be followed. And
Sure.
I have a few new blog posts in the pipeline on this topic.
Oh, amazing.
Stay tuned.
Amazing, Kasper. Thank you. We will definitely be looking out for those, and we'll do our best to share those with more of the EcoSend audience, because I'm sure people listening will be very keen to see those. So, Kasper, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for enlightening myself, at the very least, on a whole range of topics here. I got a lot to
Thanks for inviting me.
think about. Thank you so much, and
it was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. No, it's been absolute pleasure. And thank you to those of you who are listening and watching. We look forward to bringing you more shows in the future. If you've enjoyed Kasper's episode today, please do let us know via whatever podcast player you're using, and it always helps spread the word about all of the wonderful guests that we have on this show. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.